First, is it the truth? Second. Today's song is by Ash Heatwell, who I believe will be leading us in America the Beautiful. Beautiful four faces forever. Mountains majesty above the wooded America, America, God shed His grace on me, and from the with brotherhood, from sea to sea. Now let's turn to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America, and the republic for which it stands. Today's invocation is by Jonas Bontrager. Amen. Thank you, Jonas. Now I'd like to call up Dan Rice, who's going to introduce and announce our visiting Rotarians and guests.
Hello, everybody. Great to be with everybody today. We have two guests today. We have Mike Miriello joining us again, and I guess he's got a badge now. A pin? Okay, I guess I'm stealing your thunder. And we also have Chuck Bowles. He's here to hear Dr. Bill Cale today. So welcome, both of you.
So I got started a bit early because I'm looking forward to hearing from Bill, but also we've got a couple of things to take care of today. First of all, one family of Rotary that was sent to me, Karen Wigington, who's been a longtime member, was featured in Virginia Business Magazine. They did a feature on women in leadership. So one of our Rotarians, it's quite an honor. Anybody else have anything from a family of Rotary? Wow. Awesome. Yeah, it'd be great. Send Dick an email or a card or something if you think of him. But yeah, what a great guy. Anybody else? I've got a couple of things, a few announcements and things to go over. First of all, these are things that are in the rotograph. I just want to draw attention to the Feed 10 Million initiative is being done by district zone. So plug in, there's links in the rotograph, how to learn about that. Also, like many things, Mike Newpower is our guinea pig, but Amazon Smile, there's a link in the rotograph. He's kind of tested it because it was kind of confusing, but there's a link for those of you that use it. Some of it goes to the foundation. So I would encourage you to consider doing that. It's ways to build giving to the foundation. So those are just a couple of things that I want to just, by the way of announcements. Also, we mentioned Mike Mariello earlier, and he has been approved for membership by this board, by this club. So we're excited to have him. I'm going to call him up in a minute. And my first time introducing a member, so I will follow the script so I don't screw it up. So fellow Rotarians, it's my privilege and pleasure today to welcome into membership into our club, Mike Mariello, whose name was proposed by me. Thanks for accepting. We are pleased to welcome Mike as a new member. I now invite Mike to come forward to receive your pin, which I may or may not pin on you, but That's always, I might just give it to you. Mike, you have been approved for membership in this club because we believe you to be worthy representative of your vocation, interest in the ideals of Rotary, and willing to actively participate in the service activities of the club. Rotary's official motto is service above self. The object of Rotary is to encourage and foster the ideal of service as a basis of worthy enterprise, and in particular to encourage and foster, first, the development of acquaintance as an opportunity for service. Second, high ethical standards in business and professions, the recognition of the worthiness of all useful occupation, and the dignifying of each Rotarian's occupation as an opportunity to serve society. Third, the application of the ideal of service in each Rotarian's personal, business, and community life. Fourth, the advancement of international understanding, goodwill, and peace through a world fellowship of business and professional persons united in the ideal of service. We will now induct you into the membership, into the Rotary Club of Harrisonburg, Virginia, and to the Fellowship of Rotary throughout the world. So I'll now present you with your pin and a plaque, and I'll do that now. I could have the club please stand. Welcome to Rotary Club of Harrisonburg. Fellow Rotarians, I'm happy to present. Please welcome them with a round of applause. Now, Mike will be giving a thumbnail in the future. We give him some time to prepare, so he'll be letting us know sometime in the future. We'll hear more from Mike and about Mike. Thank you. Yep. So with that said, I'll call up Rodney Alderford to introduce today's speaker.
Welcome. I have a short introduction today. Bill and I had a little bit of a technical difficulties with the bio, so I don't have the full bio, but you guys are well acquainted with Bill Cale. Been in this club since 1985. So if you don't know him, shame on you. He's been here for a long time and a very good tender. Today, we're going to hear about, I think, some work he's done on genetics and some DNA testing. Right, Bill?
Well, there were a lot of twists and turns in this thing. And it's kind of a twisty and turning introduction to get to the truth of this matter. It's a strange story, but it was a fun story. And do I have a clicker to advance this? Or? All right. That's good. So go back to the title. The title is "A Fortuitous Concourse of Centimorgans." It's a twisty and turny talk. It's very confusing. Chuck Bowles has promised he'd throw tomatoes at me if I run over. So, but anyway, this fortuitous, of course, means something that comes together without your efforts. Usually a good thing, or it could be a strange thing that happens. Concourse is as the events come together. Centimorgans is a DNA term that we'll talk about. The emerging awareness of this rogue. This rogue was my relative. There's a picture of him down there. Here's a picture of him up here. My wife says I look like him. The nose and the ears especially. My ears stick out big and the nose looks like him. So Well, anyway, going back to the title of the thing, it was adapted. I adapted the name from Epictetus, who was a philosopher. Can you hear? I need to talk more directly. The philosopher Epictetus, who said that the universe was formed by a fortuitous concourse of atoms. This was the first atomic theory by the Greeks. Well, I appropriated this, a fortuitous concourse of centimorgans, how centimorgans came together to create my heritage in history. So very strange sort of turn of events that occurred with it. So it's about my, most of it's about this guy named Charney Cale. And we don't know if the Cale name is actually really Cale, and therefore whether my name is actually really Cale. So fortuitous, Charney Cale is a likely source of my surname. He is the fourth great grandfather of my line of Cales. So information passed on genetically is hard to trace for that far back. But you can do it using Y DNA. There are about 150 to 200 years of just absolute sandbagging by crazy stories that came out of this guy and were told as truth to all of us, and we took it as gospel, and none of it's true. In fact, we have a lot of NPEs in our background. That's not the parent expected. So, you know, it's good to find out these things. You can't take yourself seriously because the human race is flawed, and it's just they just do weird things. So you have to be forgiving, and you have to not take yourself too seriously. You just laugh at it. So chromosome mapping is very important to all this, and I can't do it because it's complicated. I'm not a genetic genealogist, but chromosome mapping is done by putting your chromosome, or putting the person who matches you's chromosome on top of yours and looking at the DNA that matches you. And that's a very sophisticated way of doing it. You could do it with autosomal DNA, but you can't trace surnames with autosomal DNA. And so surnames is what I needed to trace with him. Unfortunately, I started out with a Y-DNA test. Y-DNA allows you to trace surnames because the Y-DNA changes very slowly over time. So I'm going to take you on that journey. By generation 6 or 7, it's hard to identify your relatives because the DNA is so diluted, especially with autosomal DNA. And you certainly can't trust word of mouth and unsourced family because they tell lies and they make up stuff, and they're ashamed of stuff and won't tell you, and it just goes on and on. So laugh at it. That's good. A centimorgan is a probabilistic term of how likely it is that a segment of DNA will recombine from one generation to the next. I still don't understand that. The recombination of genes increases with every generation and makes it even more difficult to test. When you get down to 10 centimorgans of match, this is testing on autosomal DNA. 10 centimorgans of match, a brother or a sister is over 1,000 centimorgans to 2,000 centimorgans. So that gives you some idea. If the DNA is diluted that much, you can't trust it. 10 centimorgans or below, unless you hit a bunch of people that have low centimorgan numbers, and you can kind of suspect, well, maybe there's a relationship there. So bottom line is you need accurate archival work. You need Y-DNA for surname tracing, and because it mutates less and it's more stable, and it goes back to the original Adam supposedly, because the Y translates through the male line all the way down to the current time. So in studying Charney Cale, my fourth great grandfather, the recorded accurate archival history makes him the term rogue an apt description. So next picture. Let me see the picture of Charney. Go back. Okay, that's him. So get a picture of him. Next slide. Huge controversy that swirls around him. Don't know who his father was. Still don't know for sure, but we have some good suggestions as to who he was. Next. There are 20 years of very confusing research that with lots of conflated word of mouth data that's not accurate. Next slide. So Paul Johnson, I came to know in about 2005. He turns out to be a distant cousin. He's about a fourth cousin. He has a small but convincing concurrence of DNA and the family history that traces back to the same guy, Charney Cale. And we don't know if his name was Charney Cale really, because he went by Charney Dundalo for the first half of his life. So that's a strange thing. So, okay, next slide. This is Paul Johnson's book. He's written several books, and this is one on this area called the Pell Mell Pocosin, or the Big Woods. Strange things go on in the Big Woods. So the Pell Mell Pocosin is where all these people live, and it's an endogamous community, which means that everybody is related to everybody else, and there's a small gene pool. So that's one of the things I could have introduced myself as a person that came from a limited gene pool. So anyway, Pocosin is Algonquin Indian for a swamp on a hill. There's swamps and unique people and unexpected connections, common genetics. This is where my family vacationed every summer in this area of the country. We had a fishing cabin down there, and we went fishing when I was a child. So I would see these sites of cypresses and Spanish moss hanging off, and swamps, and these peat. The Pocosin actually has peat in it. There's a peaty accumulation that means swamp on a hill because the peat accumulates. And so these waters empty from the swamps into these shallow rivers. Next slide. So these are some technical terms, and don't look at the slide because you'll go cross-eyed. Next slide. I'm going to summarize what's here. Centimorgans shared with relatives using autosomal DNA, the first 22 chromosomes. It's important to check your matches with this because you can get a host of matches, and it's usually done on Ancestry. In this way, you can find specific matching chromosomes, and STRs, SNPs, and Y-DNA are important terms because they help to verify who your relative is. They're used in forensics, these were used to identify the Golden State Killer. You want to know how good it is. So it's good to trace especially your male heritage with these tools. And I have somebody helping me with it because the STRs are called short tandem repeats. They're repeated in the genome that are compared to somebody else. SNPs are stand for there are point mutations in DNA. SNPs are point mutations in DNA, usually used to classify the next thing, haplogroups. Haplogroups, everybody is assigned a haplogroup if you do DNA. My haplogroup happens to be haplogroup A, but there are 20 different haplogroups, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds of different divisions of it. So I happen to be haplogroup A, which is the oldest of all haplogroups. Next slide. It's clearly African. Clearly African. It's not just from the diaspora of all Africans out of Africa 50,000 years ago. It is clearly African, and it is identified with a specific area of Africa in Senegal called Senegambia. A very small area has this unique DNA, M31. My subclade of M31 is that AFTB4048. And you don't have to need to know that, but that is a subdivision. Yeah, I'll quiz you on it and see if you remember. It's the particular subclade of that M31 haplogroup. Again, it traces back to this one. These Africans, and probably Africans that either came through England to North America or they came directly to North America as on slave ships, particularly early in the Portuguese. Okay, next slide. So looking at this, there are two in my haplogroup, two people, my cousin and myself, that all trace back to this M31. So I'm a very rare bird indeed, so please be careful with me. I might go extinct. Next slide. So my autosomal DNA matches many of the surnames on the lists of historians of this area. Paul Heineck and Ira Berlin wrote books on these people. And they have lists of names. And guess what? Next slide. I matched a lot of them. And they all have the common thing that they're free people of color, mixed race, living in proximity. They have the names Bass, Nickens, Archers, Butlers, Bunches, Whites, Kings, Bazemores, Bonds, Cobbs, Dundalos, Mazels, and Castellos, and Smallwoods. Harvard Smallwood is a professor at North Carolina A&T University and a really nice guy. I did this as a joke for him. So where are the Cales? We don't know. In fact, the Cales do appear on an earlier similar list by a scholar named Pritchard, but I couldn't find his list. I just knew that that was the case. So, next slide. When I told this to my colleague, Dr. Frank Barch, years ago, in about 2005 or 6, with a smile on his face, he said, well, you look like a honky to me. So, slide 15. These people who share the common ancestry of mine, they have DNA in common. They have common geography in the big woods. Strange things going on in the big woods. Free people of color aspect, Native American aspect, which I didn't include, particularly the Chowanak Indian tribe. And there's endogamy, this limited gene pool. The story may be apparent to you, but at the time, it took me a while to absorb this crazy stuff. I was bewildered about what was going on, all these people I was related to. Next slide. So, DNA directs, affects what we become. And so these people, it turns out there's a long history, and I have some history books on that, of these people fleeing the Virginia hierarchy. You damn Virginians. They fled that Virginia hierarchy to get away so they could live their lives as they pleased. They went into the Dismal Swamp, beyond the Dismal Swamp into the Cosins. They couldn't be, our law enforcement couldn't come after them because they were getting mired in the swamp, and the snakes and the mosquitoes and such. So over the 300 plus years, the triracial Winton Triangle ancestors were mine, and a lot of them became white as the society turned against the free African Americans and people of color. And so they intermarried and they became white because of slavery, legalities, legislation, and the later social Darwinism in the late 1800s. So again, they fled there to get away to become what they would become unmolested. Next slide. Well, there's the DNA. That's the DNA double helix. This was an artistic rendering from Atlantic Monthly. The spiral is the spiral staircase of the base pairs, adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine. The ladders that are in between are the sugar phosphates that hold the spiral together. So anyway, next slide. The Watson and Crick made the announcement in 1953. DNA is a repository of storage, a repository of information. And you can find surprising information there. Next slide. Okay, all this secret stuff that was going on, these stories that were told that were strange, that Charney told that he was an Indian, and they covered up the stuff that they had black background, and So I thought of this scripture that I'd seen, for there's nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hidden that shall not be known. Therefore, whatsoever ye have spoken in darkness shall be heard in the light, and that which is bespoken in the ears and closets shall be proclaimed to the housetops. So the information was shouted to me in DNA results. Next slide. So, next slide. Well, the scripture helped me identify 250 years of cover-up. In summary, my DNA findings are findings of African DNA. The haplogroup is haplogroup A, M31, that identifies this specific area in Senegal. Most recent specific group is that we talked about. African genetic material, which is, as of 22, is a shared small community who have male genetic material mostly found in African ethnic groups, found in this country in the Bass family. The Bass family, which will come important later, as well as this area of Senegal. Next slide. Why of it all? Why is Y important? It transmits to the original atom. So specific DNA, in a specific DNA test called a Y111, 16 of 23 matches of mine match Bass's on Y DNA. So friends, I'm not a Cale, I'm a Bass. This is really pretty well confirmed. So John Bass in 1616 lived in Norfolk County, Virginia. He had a Nancyman Indian in his house named Elizabeth the Nancy. There's also an African in the house. Well, they did a little tango, and they had a child. And they moved out. We think the best information is they moved out of Virginia into adjacent North Carolina, because North Carolina was a little more loosey-goosey on the rules. So they wanted to get away from this so they could be, and they went to an area called Ershaw Swamp, which at the time was not even, which in present day is Northampton County, North Carolina. But it was not even, did not even exist then. So they did their dickering with the Native Americans. They got their own property there. So they lived off the grid essentially in North Carolina, where we think a bunch of people live, in fact, in the swamp. Next slide. So the separating and combining of genetic material produces surprising results that are hard to put together. They're limited by, my family is limited by the genetic pool of parents with information that determines us in the 4 nucleotides of DNA. There are actually 3 billion base pairs, which is incredible. And the Francis Collins identified the 3 billion base pairs in his epic study. So the above means that we are like our parents, yet different. My kith and kin are not carbon copies, but carry information from a distinct gene pool. There is endogamous relationship. Our genetics can be traceable in ancestry studies. Those ancestry studies lead to the Bass, Cale, African DNA supported by history and archive. What was Charney's secret and why did he hide it? We're going to get into a story here. I hope I have time to tell it. Next slide. Story of Charney was, for many years, Charney born in 1783, died 1860. My cousins and I heard the Indian story at our knees of our parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, great uncles, and great. It passed on like a parlor game, telephone with fantasy editions of legions over 7 to 9 generations. My 4th great grandfather, John Cale, supposedly Charney's father, we don't know that for sure. We don't much about him except he was a Revolutionary War soldier who disappeared. But Charney said he was a full-blooded Indian. So how do you explain that? That he was a full-blooded Indian. The story that Charney told has the quality of the knights of old. Charney said this John Indian was persecuted by the English overlords. Next slide. The tale, once upon a time, the wicked sheriff of the county came. The noble Indian chief Pakua Machua, which is a made up name, refused because the noble chief was not a subject, owed no allegiances to the colony. The sheriff takes the horse and do the taxes, riding away without his permission. Charney, the son and father, ran off to ambush the sheriff from capturing the horse. John, Chief Cuckamaker, or Kukuamachua, thus became a fugitive, pursued until he was shot while sitting on his donkey. The story made its way to all areas where Cale settled, and they would kill you if you tried to dispute it, because it's taken as fact. Next slide. Charney Cale's mother was Anne Dundelow, with by Charney Dundelow the first half of his life. Chief and Indian myth, but elsewhere in the country. And people like to tell it to be related to Native Americans, especially in the South, because they don't have to worry about some black heritage or background. So there's no legal or primary source that supports any of this story. My cousin first debunked it with 40 years of archival research, and he is a good archivist. He knows what he's doing. Finally, I debunked it with my DNA evidence of male African heritage, no direct Native American heritage. And herein lies the motive for Charney killing his tail. Next slide. Well, we got together, our family got together in 2006 for a family reunion. And here is the family eating like families do. And here is the marquee of the church where Charney became. That's all right, you can go to the next one. Charney became a member of Ross Baptist Church and was baptized at age 50. I think this church interior is really beautiful. Next slide. These are some of my cousins. This is the daughter, one of the daughters of Charney Cale. These people preserved the story and passed it on. And the fellow on the left, Stanley Hoggart, is the grandson of this lady. He was 90 at the time, and he would not deny the story's truth. He wrote the story in his history of the church, in fact. Next slide. So we went to Ross Creek Church where Charney was baptized. There is a creek nearby called Cuckamaker Creek. Where do you think he got his name? Where do you think Charney got the name from? Charney returned here to the big woods with his wife after serving the war of 1812. Church historian Stanley Hoggart, age 90, still quite astute. At the time I met him, but unwilling to discount the myth. I think he was afraid to, because he would be decapitated by people who hold the myth highly. Stanley Hoggart's grandmother, her name again was Penelope. Let's go on because we covered this. Why would such a story originate? Well, Charney was a rounder. He had a reputation as a rounder. He had children here and there, some in marriage, some not. He was hauled into court in 1802 on a bastardy bond. He was discharged honorably from the War of 1812 after he got things together a bit. He had over 20 children that we know of by his wife and some not. He married again after his first wife died and had more children by the second wife. He amassed over 1,600 acres of land, which is pretty good for an illegitimate pauper. He did that. The church minutes document that he got into an argument with a lady and then spooked her horse afterwards, which is a dangerous thing. She apparently did it on purpose, and they banned him from the church for that. Next slide. So here we are in the Pocosin. In the peat bogs with these people who are yeoman farmers, loggers, people of color, African Americans, Native Americans, and mulattoes. All our farmers are commercial fishermen or loggers. The larger farms are generally on the outside of the Pocosin, and they're slave labor. Okay, with the slave labor. So he dealt with binary race issues. And the Pell Mell book discusses this phenomenon as many of these people became white over time. Okay, this is where Charney came from. It was dubbed Rogues Harbor by the Virginians because they didn't like to follow the laws or the recommendations handed down to them from the Virginia rule and hegemony. So if you look here, there's a river. There are two rivers that form a triangle at what's the Albemarle Sound, and the Pocosin. So it's called a rogue from Rogues Harbor with good reason. What time are we? What, next slide. Okay. I'm going to go quickly through this. This is earlier name of the Albemarle region dubbed by Virginians. Charney lived here. He lived here, and the people lived off the grid in this area before the first settlement. These first Carolinians were repeatedly threw out incompetent, crooked deputy governors appointed by Virginia, and there was the first armed uprising in the country over trying to defy the rule of the Virginians. It harbored the likes of Edward Teach, who was a pirate, and other such notorieties. It was an area that tolerated various Christian beliefs of the day. Before the Civil War, it was a Whig stronghold opposing secession. Before the Civil War, my people were Unionists. Whoa. Afterward, they were Reconstructionists. This is all stuff I didn't know, by the way. They hid from others and themselves the free people of color status. Charney fit the mold as the leader in doing this. So there's bewilderment about my African DNA, which I've come to accept. I have new relatives, the Bassett's. My name is probably Bass. Next. So when I get a little bit sad, I push the trophy button on my Billy Bass. Billy Bass, I like the new name. And I sing. Friends, don't take life too seriously. Thank you. Yes, he did. That's where you were there. But you know these people, and they're characters, I'll tell you. Yes, sir. Well, I think you need to do two things. Ancestry.com does the autosomal DNA, which is important, but if you're tracing surnames, the Y DNA is vital, and that's family tree DNA. So that's how I got into all this information, through family tree DNA, which has the Y DNA, and that's what they test for the cheek swabs. That's what I got in 2000. It was actually a National Geographic genographic project that I got started on it. Found my African DNA at that time, and just totally bewildered for almost 20 years until I worked it out. Okay.
So one of my takeaways, if you think about Rotary building goodwill and better understanding, people of this world may be more alike than we think. And I really appreciate your perspective, Bill, on kind of keeping it real. So thank you, Bill. Thank you for our guests. Mike, you're no longer a guest. Welcome. Yeah. Thank you for coming as well as Bill's guest. And we'll see you all next time. We are adjourned.